I have to say I'm really impressed by the fact that people, despite the Zoom fatigue, are still showing up. That's very nice of you. Hopefully you're going to get value of our events. We're saying with Yaron when we did our first event in May that this is definitely the last online event. Then we did another one in November, and we said, well, now this is definitely the last one. But here we are again, still in lockdown, still doing online events. Anyway, let's focus on the positive. And the positive is we're not talking about politics. We're not talking about elections. We're talking about the positive value of music. And we have with us today someone who can help us understand how to appreciate music, who can help us understand how music can add value to our life and can help us, even if we know things about music, to reappreciate it and, let's say, see it under a new prism. So we have Thomas Shoebotham. Thomas is a cellist. Thomas is a conductor. He's the principal conductor for the new ballet in San Jose. I'm not going to try to explain, to tell you his whole repertoire because it's probably more than an A4 page, but you can find in his website. He's very accomplished. People have also heard him performing in Ocon, so some of you already know him. But also we have the chairman of the board of the Annual Institute. We have Yaron Brook, also the host of the Yaron Brook show. Now, why do we have Yaron? So let me tell you the backstory, which is I've asked a couple of objectivists to talk about arts in general. And they told me, no, you need to have Yaron because he's the one who taught us how to appreciate art and who taught us how to appreciate music. So Yaron was a bit humble. He said, well, I'm not sure, but due to popular demand, here he is.
Yaron humble, there's a concept for you.
Sorry? Oh yeah, we had the whole discussion the other day with some objectives whether humbleness could be a virtue, but you get the point. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is we're going to do it interview style, which means instead of having opening remarks, we're going to go in circles of questions and answers. Now, I encourage people very quickly to jump in with their questions. Don't leave the questions to me because I am illiterate when it comes to music. So my questions are going to be very basic. My questions are going to be of a very low level. So please feel free to jump in whenever you want, either to ask questions based on that round or to introduce a new theme, to introduce a new topic. So let me start with the first question that I have. And the question is the thing that I have in my mind is I usually listen to music when I do things around the house, or I listen to classical music, or what people call higher quality music, if there is such a thing, we're going to find out, when I do things like marking. So I have it as background music. And I wonder if this is the proper way to listen to music, or whether I'm doing a sacrilege and actually this is not the way to listen to and appreciate music. So let's start with Thomas.
Well, I would answer that by saying that there is not one correct way to listen to this. I mean, if you are listening to the music as background, if you listen to say a Beethoven symphony or a Mozart string quartet or any of that kind of stuff as a background, that can be a value if it's helping you do something. But I would say that you're not getting you surely aren't getting the most out of it that you could be getting out of it by doing it that way. I wouldn't say it's wrong, or if you're doing household chores, but really for the kind of, depending on what kind of music we're talking about, but if we're talking about the serious concert music of the last 200-300 years, the best way to listen to it is to listen to it to contemplate it as something with pretty much no other distraction around you. That's the way you're going to get the most out of it. Now, you can get value. There can be different levels of attention. You can get kind of partial attention as you grade papers. If you can, for instance, I have music that I like to listen to on long car drives out on highways where there's not a lot of traffic. As soon as I get into traffic, I can't even begin to listen to any serious music because it's just too distracting. When there's traffic around me and all the the mental effort it takes to drive, plus trying to listen to a detailed, rich symphony or string quartet. Can't do it. I can't stand to listen to something in urban traffic. Some people do.
So apparently there is a right way to listen to music if you want to really appreciate. So what would you say that way is?
Well, there's either you're in a concert hall with a ideal situation, or you're in a home with a decent sounding audio system, and you can either put on a CD or stream the music. Now that's more than way now, but either of those ways seems to work. The concert hall experience, of course, I mean, haven't had that in about a year for most parts of the world, but that has its own advantages. I mean, the advantage of the live thing is that there is a certain, and I hate to almost say it, but there's a kind of a communal thing where everybody's in this one place listening to this performance that's happening, and there's only one time that performance is going to happen, and whatever happens in that performance is a unique experience that everybody there in the room gets to share. And then with the recording, what you've got usually is something that's very carefully engineered, like almost like a film, put together, edited, made to sound a certain way, and then you can put it on in your living room, and then that's a slightly different experience. But either one will help you really appreciate the music at the deepest level, help you get the most out of it.
Right. Yaron, what's your take on that? Is there a proper way to listen to music?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Thomas. If you want to get the most out of the music, if the music is worthy of getting something out of it, right? Not all music deserves your full attention. I find when I drive, I play music that doesn't deserve my full attention. It's not that important. It gives me some energy. It keeps me awake during the drive. I can bounce around to it. I don't know, a lot of more popular music, a lot of music from when I grew up, country music, music like that I don't think has any kind of deep meaning and deep value that you really want to focus on. It's great for background music. But when I walk into a room and there's Beethoven playing in the background, I'm immediately torn because I immediately want to listen to the Beethoven, right? He deserves listening to, and I want to experience the emotion of what he's conveying, or Brahms, or Rachmaninoff. I mean, it drives me crazy if I walk into a room and there's Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto playing. I want to be swept away. But now I have to talk to Nikos, who's chatting me up, and in the background there's this thing that's, and I'm torn. So I don't get a really fully engaging conversation with you, and I don't really get to enjoy the music, and I find that distracting and a negative, and it actually, I think it cheapens the music. So I don't like really good music. I don't like to have background or in social gatherings. Some pieces that are lighter can fit, but mostly in kind of social gathering when people are speaking, I think certain forms of jazz or certain forms of popular music or what's called elevator music are quite appropriate. But I think serious classical music is distracting. So in terms of how I listen to music, yes, I can have it in the background, but again, I don't usually have stuff in the background that I'm really engaged in. Now, if I want to listen to a new piece, let's say it's a composer that I'm having difficulty with, right? I mean, some of the later 19th century composers are difficult. They're difficult to get the melodies, the complexity, they're long. Sometimes I'll put that in the background while I do other things just to get used to it, right? Just to get used to it, and then I will dedicate real time to listening. And in terms of the ideal, I mean, I like the concert hall. It's great. But I find, and I agree with Thomas, there's a certain sense you get from other people are sharing in your value, and they're all enjoying it, and you're enjoying it together. There's no question there's a shared energy, there's a shared advantage there. I find it a little distracting in terms of really concentrating the music because there's a lot going on, right? There's visually a lot going on. My preference, my ideal situation for listening to music, I've said this on my show many times, lights are off, no other sounds, and the volume cranked up to 11, right? So your entire focus, everything is on, and then it's just your mind and the music. And even then your mind might drift, and you have to bring it back to the music, and the different techniques for how to focus it on the music. But that to me is the ideal. I'm not saying that's the only way to listen to music, but that's the ideal. I mean, certainly you can listen to music with the lights on, you can listen to music while other stuff is going on, but that is I think the ideal situation in which to fully, emotionally experience what the music has to convey.
Right. So you mentioned
I
that.
think Ron brings up a very valuable point there, that the kind of music that you can listen to without maybe your full mental or emotional engagement, if you're like driving, for instance. We also, in almost any music, it's important to ask, what is the music intended for? Is it intended to be contemplated just sit down and contemplate that music and receive it? Or is it, for instance, is it music that is created for dance? And then if we're talking about music created for dance, what kind of dancing? Are we talking about artistic ballet dancing? Are we talking about social dancing? I'm, for instance, well, at least until the pandemic, I was a huge I did a lot of swing dancing. West Coast swing dancing is called. And that mostly is to contemporary top 40 and mostly down-tempo rhythm and blues. And for that kind of stuff, for dancing, that music is absolutely wonderful. Now, I don't usually put on top 40 and listen to it, but if I'm out dancing, that's great music for that purpose.
Yeah, right. I mean, and of course, if there's a visual component like dance or opera or operetta, or you want to be engaged visually in it, and you want to be able to get the full experience if possible. And truly the full experience then is to see it live on stage in 3 dimensions with staging and acting and the whole thing. Watching it on a TV off of a DVD is fantastic, but not as good as the live experience. And Linda asks, to whom and for what? Of course, it's always to whom and for what. But there are, I think, objective standards in terms of art. And, there is if you're reading poetry, which I know Linda does, and there's noise going on in the background, you're just going to get less of the experience of the poetry reading when you're distracted by noise. And that's human. That's part of being human. So it's objective. I don't think it's too, now, if you don't care about poetry, then sure. But if you're trying to get the most out of poetry, there's a way to get the most out of poetry. And I think there's a way to get the most out of music, particularly, again, the music that has more to convey in terms of depth of emotion and scope of emotion.
So, Yaron, you mentioned the idea of listening to something more than once. And this brings me to a question that links music with philosophy. So, Ayn Rand said that what is particular about music is that it goes from the perceptual level, from the level of listening, straight to the level of creating an emotion. And then you have to evaluate it. So how is this different from different kinds of art? For example, would you say that maybe you listen one song once and it doesn't create something inside you, but then you listen to it second time, third time? If music works in this almost straight to the perceptual level and then to the conceptual level, how can it be that you can really appreciate it when it looks like it hits you like that?
This is a much better question for Thomas than me. But I think that when you have very complex music that might have a complex melody, you just can't. You need a practice to integrate it. You need you need to listen to it a number of times. It's still true that it goes direct. So here's the thing, because you're giving Ayn Rand's view kind of a little bit of it out of context. You have to differentiate it to really understand it. When you look at a painting, yes, you almost immediately feel something, but the emotion is derived from a very fast integration of what the painting represents to you. So it goes through some kind of conceptual pathway. It goes, you understand, oh, there's a story. Oh, it's David. Oh, he's heroic. Oh, beautiful. I'm excited, right? Now that happens very quickly because it appeals. It's kind of it's very fast, right? Because it's happening subconsciously, and it's very quickly. That appraisal is happening very quickly. With music, there's nothing to really. I mean, again, if you're a professional musician, I'm sure there's stuff that, but when you're not a professional like me, there's nothing to understand about the music. All there is to experience. All you do is experience the music. And it has an immediate impact on your emotions. Now, sometimes, because of its particular complexity, it takes time for you to get used to it, and therefore it takes time for you to have that experience. But it is not because you're thinking about it, it's because you're getting used to a particular new pattern of melodies and harmonies and the technical stuff that maybe Thomas can talk about. So it's really important to understand the contrast. What Ayn Rand was contrasting music with other forms of art, which are essentially conceptual, and conceptual in the way we experience. They're emotional, but they go through a conceptual process. Music goes direct to emotion. I lost to say this. I think it's important just to set the groundworks. Ayn Rand was very careful in her discussion of music to say that we still didn't have the full knowledge to have a theory of music, and this was as close as she came to, developing an hypothesis and trying to present evidence for that, but not being definitive about this is her view. This is the view based on the evidence that she had, which she recognized was limited, and she recognized the kind of knowledge we would have to gain in order to have a full appreciation of aesthetics of music, versus when she writes about literature, she's very definitive. She knows what she's talking, she knows exactly what, she has a view about what's true and what's not, and it's definitive. With music, it's not. She's more tentative in that sense.
Thomas.
Yeah, I think, Yaron, you raise a point about having to hear things sometimes several times. One of the problems, if you want to call it a problem with music, is that music happens over time. It fits in over often a long span of time, but it fits in over time, and there is a sense in which you cannot understand any part of a piece of music until you've heard the whole piece of music from beginning to end. And being able to focus on a long piece of music takes practice, especially if it's very dense or complex, or there's a high level of, say, counterpoint, a variety of instrumentation, orchestration. So yeah, it's very normal to hear something, not get a lot out of it, but then maybe on a second or a third hearing, you start to say, oh, something that happens early in the piece of music, now I understand what it's, how it gets fulfilled later in the piece of music. And if you hear it several times, then you've got something to start holding on to. You can hear how the parts work together, how they relate to each other. It's much easier if you've done a lot of listening in the past, you've already got a framework. And then if you hear a certain particular piece over and over, then you can get to a point where you can hear so much more of the sort of the inner workings, the connections.
Right, thank you. And I see in the chat people discuss what is the best system to use to listen to and enjoy the music. So as I said in the beginning, this is interview style. So for every round, if you want to ask a question, you ask the question on that round. So we go to the first question from our audience. I'm going to give priority to live questions. And so we go to Megan. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Nikos. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. I have a question about music appreciation for young children. My daughter is 5, and I'll give you a brief example of what I do in visual arts. We were at the museum, and there's this picture of a mommy holding a toddler, and the brushstrokes are very broad, and it's very soft. And I said to my daughter, if I were going to paint me holding you, I would do it in bright colors and sharp outlines, because what I feel for you is so intense. Now, when it comes to music, I have no idea what to say. So can you give me a little guidance as to help draw things out for her when we listen to music together?
I don't think there's a lot to do. I mean, how old you say she's 5?
Yes.
I would just listen almost listen to things that you like, and then without much judgment, without much guidance, just if she asks questions, answer the questions that you know how to answer. If she's 5, you could start contemplating what I think is absolutely the best way to learn to appreciate music, which is to actually become involved in music. That is, either you learn an instrument or you learn singing or anything like that. The more involved with music you are, I think the more you will have the ability to appreciate it. So studying an instrument, studying singing, study just not because you're trying to create a professional musician, not necessarily because you're trying to create a prodigy, though so they're so few and so dangerous anyway, but just simply because the knowledge of music you will gain just by doing it is more than any of the classes that, and I even advocate this for adults, that, as an adult, you can still take up an instrument, you can still learn to sing and join a community choir, or even dancing, I think. Learning to dance will actually increase one's appreciation of music, because music has to go, dance has to go with music. So it should get you listening more to music. It'll have you paying attention to more of the things that happen in music. So I can't stress enough that I think, both as a practicing musician and as someone who teaches lessons, that giving kids or adults more involvement in music making increases your ability to listen to music better.
So I would just add that I think it's worthwhile using as an opportunity to ask the child what they're feeling when they listen to a particular piece of music. So what emotion are they recognizing? Because I think it works good in terms of their ability to introspect. What am I feeling? And some music will be nothing, and that's fine. And then other music will be surprised that a child will say, "That's sad," or "Makes me happy." But those are really good to get them thinking in terms of music and emotion. And then the other thing I'd encourage them to do is move, in a sense, dance, right? Move to the music. I mean, one of the things that drives me nuts in a concert hall, and maybe Thomas might disagree with me on this one, is I'm sitting there and everybody's sitting and they won't move. And I'm like, my head is bouncing and my knees bouncing, and I want to be conducting with my hands, because that's how I listen to music at home often. And everybody's this stiff in a suit and doesn't move an inch. And I find that repressive. So, I'd encourage the child to move to the music, to express themselves with the music, and vocalize the emotion that they're feeling.
Absolutely. And that's a great thing about how we can do music at home with home sound systems, and that's such an advantage. And that's obviously in most cases better than taking a little kid to a concert hall. Yep. They're not usually able to sit still and sit quietly anyway. And having kids move, according to my father once, when I was about maybe 2, he put some headphones on me of some piece. It was maybe one of the dances from some ballet or something. And I was just sitting around the room as a toddler going with the headphones on, just doing this. And I'm sure that was very formative. I'm sure that helps. My father's not a professional musician by any means, but just that kind of thing helps bring music to a kid. If you can sing, even if you're not a good singer, sing to your kid, sing to your child, sing songs that you know how to sing. It's tremendously helpful. And then play stuff. Don't play a Mahler symphony for a 5-year-old. I doubt they have the framework to get something out. But play a Dvorak Slavonic dance that's 3 minutes long, or play, when Bach was teaching his children, he compiled other pieces by people and wrote small, short little keyboard pieces for them both to learn the keyboard and for them to learn what he wrote in German, an appreciation of music.
So thank you very much, Megan. That was an excellent question, bringing me to the actual question, which is for someone who is not 5 years old, but who has the music education of a 5-year-old, which is basically myself or people like myself. So if I'm a beginner, and let's say I know all the classical tunes, I've heard them before, I kind of get the rhythm, I get why they're nice. But if I want...
Not all the commercials, you heard them in the commercials.
I've heard them in the commercials, yes. But I want to get serious about grasping and understanding music in a better way. So where do I start? So how do I do it? Because
I would be very patient with yourself. And I would start small. Like, for instance, even a Beethoven symphony is too much. Try a movement of a symphony, or try a movement of a string quartet. Try try some of the small, there are miniatures, like say Chopin wrote small pieces, individual mazurkas or, polonaises that are 4, 5, 7 minutes, or even, Rachmaninoff wrote preludes that are short. There's all these, and Schumann wrote lots of small piano pieces, some of them even intended for children, a Kinderscene, child scenes and things. So there are all sorts of, I would definitely be very patient with yourself. Don't try to put on some, if you ask me, what is the greatest piece of chamber music, I would say it's the Schubert Quintet with 2 cellos, but it's an hour long. Don't put on that if you're a beginner. I think it's an incredible piece of music, but after 6 minutes, your brain might be just like, and it's not your fault. It's not the music's fault. It's just the context is not meshing yet.
Yeah, I have a friend who is an aficionado of great music, and he just sent me a private message. Says, in a way, don't start with the Rite of Spring but if you say that you'd start with that, you'd sound very smart, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I agree with Thomas. Let me just. I agree with Thomas. I'd say also, experiment. Try different things. But try them in short bites. You don't even have to finish a movement. If you find yourself distracted and can't really focus, wait and try it another day. But I would say this, to really do it, you have to really do it. That is, I do think you have to spend some time and give it some focus. You can't just do it as, I'll dabble with it and really gain the kind of appreciation you want to. You have to say, okay, I'm going to devote the next hour to listening to some things. I might listen to a piece of a piano concerto. I might listening to a few songs from an operetta or an aria from an opera or something choral or whatever. Just try a bunch of different things and see what attracts you. Then the things that you like, go in and do longer and try to lengthen, and then maybe try again the things that you don't like, because just in case, maybe your taste has now changed because you're immersed in this. And a good guide the one thing that's good about this is that, the cultures, the stuff that the culture thinks is good from the 19th century is, I think, actually good. With the 20th century, you can be suspicious, at least to the second half of the 20th century. But of the 19th century, if they say it's good, so any list, any book that gives you a list of good classical music pieces is probably going to do a decent job. Any book that tells you how to listen to classical music is probably going to do a decent job. So I would start with the classics, with the things that are acknowledged in the culture as good, and then you can take it down some path of some speciality or something unique or something particularly interesting. But start with the big names and the big and the famous pieces, because there's a reason they're famous. There's a reason they've stuck, and they are so popular. And try to get out of your head the commercials. I think commercials do damage, because try to listen beyond the little tune that you got from the commercial and listen to a chunk of it.
Right.
I think another thing that can be very useful in this regard is that I did a course on this. I can't remember which film music. There's a lot of film music that you can start. It's symphonic, and if you can start by tying that into things that you saw in the movie, even if you listen to the film music on its own terms, you can often get soundtrack. But you can start to hear a symphonic style or a more classical, if you want to call it, style. And you can, if you have those associations, you can start to make connections in your head, and then you can branch off into music that doesn't have those connections.
Right.
And Richard in the chat makes a really good suggestion, which I agree completely with. That is, if you're really serious about this, there's real value in studying or taking a course, online course or something, in the history of music, because the history of music is fascinating. Music is built one on top of the other. There's there's Bach, and then there's the classical period, and then there's the romantic period. And they build on top of one another. Once you realize the sequence and you realize what they're doing and what the differences are, which the history of music will explain, I think you gain an appreciation for the music, a deeper appreciation for the music. So definitely either pick up a book, or now you can just do an online course that it's pretty easy about the history of music. That's great.
So we're going to go to...
If you had if you had unlimited amounts of time, you could do, I would say the best thing would be to do a course like that, a musical history course, and learn an instrument or take some lessons on an instrument or singing.
You don't have unlimited time, though. So the question would be is which version of the music you want to hear should you listen to, I think, and I'd be interested in,
whose recordings? Well, that's such a piece specific.
But there's big differences. So much on
what piece you're talking about, and then who you ask.
Right.
I think there are big differences. I think you're right, but the appreciation of the differences comes after the appreciation of the piece of music. That is, I think, for almost every piece of music, you can appreciate it even with a mediocre performance. And then once you understand or you gain an appreciation and you understand what you like about the music, then suddenly you hear a great performance, it blows you out of the water. And on the other hand, the other way around sometimes is very disappointing. If you listen to the greatest performance ever of a symphony that you fall in love with, then and that's what you start out with, and everything else disappoints afterwards, and it becomes a challenge. But again, you get different things out of different performances. So you could have 2, 3, 4, 5 different great performances, and each one is bringing out something different in the music, and you're responding subtly in a different way. So you can have Beethoven's Seventh performed in very different ways, but you can enjoy them all. You might have a favorite, of course, but you can enjoy them all and get different things out of them. But that, I think, is more advanced after you've already got the basis. And I think Thomas right. I mean, different pieces of music are going to have the exceptional performances are going to be by different people, and then people are going to disagree about what their favorite performance is because, again, they get something a little different out of the music and they respond differently from the music.
One of the things I tell my private students over and over is that I don't want them to play. I'm not trying to get them to imitate me. I tell them if you gave the same Shakespeare soliloquy to 10 great Shakespearean actors, you're going to get 10 different readings. And all of them are probably very great readings because if you're assuming that they're all great actors. But they're going to be very different from each other. Same thing is going to happen with a symphony or a string quartet or piano concerto or whatever. You give that to 10 different great conductors or pianists or string quartet, they're going to get 10 different readings. They're going to be the same piece, but it's still going to be you're going to hear a lot of differences. Now, which one you prefer, that's one thing, but they're all going to be interesting.
Right. So one written question, and then I'll go to Mike to ask a live question. Let's keep the queue because I already have a lot of questions from people. So, question for Thomas. For an adult wanting to learn vocals and or piano without access to a coach, can you recommend any particular methods or resources?
Well, the problem right now is, of course, lessons are I'm giving a lot of lessons, but I give them all on Zoom, which is hardly ideal. I mean, Zoom is amazing, but trying to learn music over Zoom is tricky. So you may have to wait until if you're trying to learn an instrument now, trying to learn an instrument without a teacher is almost impossible. I will have to say, I would not recommend to anybody that they try and learn anything complex or about, you're not trying to really try to learn anything about an instrument or singing. I mean, you can sing at a certain level just by yourself, but if you want to really learn about making music in a meaningful way, you really do need someone qualified to show you. And right now that's tricky because of the world situation.
Right. David, that's a great question. I'm going to come to you in a second. Let's go to Mike, who wants to ask a live question. Mike?
Yeah, you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hey,
Thank
Mike.
you.
Okay, let me start by reading a question that was in the promotion for this event. How can one go from, quote, I like music to I understand music and now I enjoy it even more? So my question is, how does that sort of enjoyment differ from sense of life enjoyment, particularly when you keep in mind Ayn Rand's statement in Art and Cognition that one can appreciate the aesthetic value of a composition, but neither like or even enjoy the music. So they seem to be qualitatively different. So the question is, understanding the music, what kind of enjoyment is enhanced by that? And how does it differ from a sense of life enjoyment?
Thank you.
Well, for instance, if you heard I don't know if this might get too, I don't want to try not to get technical, but there's a thing like in the Baroque period called a fugue, which is a certain kind of composition. And if you understand how those work, you can listen to say a Bach fugue, which has certain compositional techniques, and you can appreciate those much more if you know what's happening in them, versus if you just listen to a fugue and don't know what it's about. You might enjoy it at a certain level. You might get something out of it. You might even have a sense of life enjoyment. But if you want to get sort of an enjoyment out of what this compositional style or what this form is, studying it and learning about it will deepen sort of what you might say your aesthetic appreciation of a fugue, say.
So it's really appreciation, admiration, rather than what I would call, or what Ayn Rand I think is calling, enjoyment in any kind of metaphysical sense. That's not enhanced, or do you think that is somehow enhanced by the increased knowledge? I mean, I don't experience it that way. That increased knowledge, I mean, the music still has the same metaphysical content, but you know more about what's going on. You appreciate what the composer has done. You understand in the context of the history of music, perhaps. And like, so what are you, see what I mean?
I find that it affects my aesthetic. I mean, not profoundly. I agree with you that profound is what's metaphysically in the music, but it changes the context for my listening to it. That is, my consciousness is primed in a different way if I know more about what's going on.
Give me an example. Sorry about that.
No, I know. We get facts and concretes. I know.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know exactly, because it's hard with music. It's hard to explain. So I think that when I studied the history of music, or some stuff about the history of music, and understood what, let's say, they were doing in the Romantic period versus the Classical period, I just experienced it differently after that. So I can't say what it is that happened, but I think that knowledge conditioned me to hear it, to experience it differently. So I don't know if I wouldn't say it changes your sense of life, but it does. I mean, there's a consciousness that's experienced it on the other side. And if that consciousness is now different because it has different knowledge, I think that would affect how you respond to the music.
You know, the point that Ira makes is that with the sense of light direction, you want to be in that world. So you hear a piece of music and you hear it over and over again. And the more you hear it, the more you want to be in that world. You want to hear it again because you want to go, experience again being in that world. That's what I'm interested in, how that is affected by increased knowledge musicologically, if you.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you already like a piece of music and sort of on a sense of life level, then it may be that learning more about it might or might not increase your enjoyment. If you already do it, it might be for a piece that you don't have a lot of enjoyment or identification with. Learning about its techniques and its methods might not change how much you like it, but you could listen to it even so with more appreciation.
Right. By the way, I have very good questions, but for some reason, people are sending their questions as private messages. Put it in the chat so more people can benefit, because these are very, very good questions. So, okay, next question is by David. So the question is, Yaron talks about emotions, Thomas about understanding. Can you elaborate on the connection between the understanding of music and the emotions that music creates?
So I don't understand music. I'm not educated in music. That's why I said, why am I on this panel? I have no idea. I don't understand. Maybe it's because I don't understand, so you can see the contrast. I don't. I mean, I've studied the history of music, but have not studied music. I respond to music. And I guess I respond to some extent in the sense that that's the world I want to live in. To some music, that's true. Some music I find that gives me a different kind of emotional response. It's a response of I want that energy, right? I want that excitement I want in my life. So it's not necessarily the world. So Beethoven, I don't want to live necessarily in Beethoven's world, but I get immense energy from the conflict. And I didn't like Beethoven on a sense of life basis, and I think I understand why, because she didn't want to live in that world, and I don't. But I get an immense amount of energy from listening to Beethoven. He stimulates an emotion in me that excites me, that wants me to get going. And so, and that's without the understanding. So I think it relates, it's somewhere around Mike's question. That is, you're responding to something in the music, and will you respond if you know the notes and you know all the details and the understanding? And I think that would change how you respond to the music, but to some extent. But even if you don't understand anything about the music, you're going to respond to some of it in a very positive way and some very negative, because it doesn't correspond to any kind of world you want or any kind of positive emotion that is stimulated within you. So any kind of value which causes your emotions to be stimulated. But this is what makes music difficult to talk about and difficult to really understand how you respond to it.
Yeah, it's difficult to talk about, and there's so many levels on which one can appreciate and enjoy the music. If you are happy enough with listening to a certain kind of music, whatever kind of music, and that really excites you and that you identify with it and it makes you happy, and you don't want to do more, well, I can't say you need to go off and do this. I mean, you might get more out of it, but what you need, there's so many levels on which it can be appreciated. And I would argue that the more you know about it, the more things you can appreciate. And even in pieces you already enjoy, you will hear more things that usually will increase your enjoyment.
And the parallel I could think of is, let's say you watch a game of basketball when you really understand the tactics. So when I listen to music, all I can get is, let's say, the rhythm, but you can get way more. In the same way that someone who watches a basketball game, they can see the ball going in, but if you can understand the movement of the team, the tactics, let's say the triangle offense, then you see it at a different level, as a piece of beauty at a completely different level.
But this is the point Rand is making about the way music works and the way it affects us, is that she's making the point that it goes directly to emotion. I mean, what Mike was saying, you have a sense of life response to it. It's not going through some kind of conceptual filter, if you will. You're not thinking about it. And the question is that response, that instantaneous response, going to be different the more knowledge you have about music? And I suspect the answer is yes. I can't tell you exactly why, other than I think the more you know about something, the consciousness that is responding to the music is a little different. There's something different there. More knowledge means something is different in your brain, in a sense, and you're responding in a slightly different way. That's the best I can come up with. But again, I can't prove it, partially because we have very little knowledge about music and about how it works and how it affects you. But I don't think it's like basketball. It's hard to create examples from the outside because of the unique way in which music affects you directly.
Right. So we have a comment which is related to Megan's question. I find it very interesting. So James says, years ago, I watched the movie I'd already seen, but there was no music score. It's a great way to introduce kids to the impact music has on the viewer, with the intention to generate an emotion or feeling. For example, horror movies would lose the suspense and jump factor without it.
Yes, and you can see that particularly, I've tried that with, what's interesting is if you watch silent movies, you get both, right? Because it's a beautiful combination of this acting that's so intense that it conveys an emotion just in the acting, but without the music, it's half of impactful, and the same if you flip it. But when you combine it, it can be really, really powerful. Just the music and the acting without any dialogue, without, and of course the visuals that movies have.
one of the things when I did the course on film music at Oconoco, exactly this thing. I began the entire course by showing the final scene of the first Star Wars movie, the throne room scene where they go and get the medals, with no music. The whole scene, like all 3 minutes of it, they're just walking down this aisle in complete dead silence. And then everybody, and by the end, by like 2 minutes in, all of these, OCOD attendees were just basically giggling and laughing. They couldn't believe how uncomfortable and awkward the scene looks. And then, of course, after that was over, I put it on with the music, and what a difference the music makes in the scene.
Yeah, that's a great example about the power of music. So someone who is too shy to put this publicly in the chat asks, is watching the Disney film Fantasia, or I don't know how it's pronounced originally, is it a good introduction to classical music for the uninitiated? That way you can get adults and kids involved. Again, this is a follow-up from the first question we got from my friend, how to help her 5-year-old get initiated to good music.
I would say, why not? I mean, that's the film Fantasia, and then they made a second one about 20 years ago. Yeah. Why not? I mean, again, especially for kids, some of the imagery is a bit unusual, or some of the imagery seems odd to me, but I've watched it. I watched it as a kid and liked it. Certainly anything that exposes children to music like that, I'm all in favor of it.
Just be careful, because some of it is scary.
Well, there's that. Yes.
The music and the imagery together combined can be really scary. So, but yes, I think Fantasia is wonderful. It's a great way to introduce people to it. Not all, and again, as long as you don't just stop there. If you're really interested in music, go explore and find the things that you like that connect with you.
Right, Peter, we're gonna get to your question in a second, but let me ask another question. So, what makes something classical music? So can we claim, for example, that music that sounds a bit like, quote, classical, again, for the uninitiated? So, for example, I'll mention 2 Greeks, Yanni or Vangelis Papathanasiou. Would we say that this music at some point will be recognized as classical music? It's already symphonic music, but is it going to be classical? And I remember I had a teacher of literature who was seriously claiming that Pink Floyd should not be considered rock, should be considered classical music, because they've reached this level of that the sound is so great. So what's your take on that?
I would say 2 things. First of all, the term classical music is admittedly somewhat imprecise. There isn't absolutely clear-cut boundaries and all. However, I would think it would be stretching quite a bit to call Pink Floyd classical music. I have now, going back to the first point, that the boundaries of what is strictly speaking classical music is somewhat imprecise. I have seen a concerto with orchestra and electric guitar. I mean, that's it was conducted, it was in a concert hall with an audience. I've seen it. It wasn't an awful piece. It wasn't a piece that particularly appealed, but it was written to be a concert piece. So, the boundaries, what instruments you use, what musical language you use, what's the intention of the music, all of these things kind of play into whether something is classical. I have sometimes been hesitant to use that term, and I just use the phrase art music or artistic music, concert music. I've tried sometimes. All of these run into problems, though.
Right. Because to be honest, when I first came across Richard Halley in Atlas Shrugged, I picture it more not like the actual pieces that Ron has, but something way more bombastic. That's why I thought about Vangelis, for example. Anyway, Yaron, what's your take? I
mean, just again, I don't have the musical knowledge, so I can't tell you why. But, the Yanni and Yanis or Vangelis or whatever, just from the response, it's just shallow. It's thin. There's no depth. It doesn't really invoke any. You can listen to it once, and it's kind of cute, but or maybe even good. But if you listen to it 5 times, you get bored by it. I find that the classical music I listen to, I can listen to many times, and I never get bored with it. It's enveloping, and it's Mike said it's the world I want to be in. There's a sense of that, but it's Yeah. So and I think that's true of most of the more popular music. It's okay. As I said, when I'm driving along, it's kind of nice. But if I really turn off the lights and really focused on it, there's nothing to focus on. It slips through your fingertips and it's not there. Now, Pink Floyd, I like Pink Floyd. I enjoy parts of Pink Floyd. It's very dark. But and I like what they do with the guitar, and I like the melodies. But again, it only goes so far. I can't listen to it more than fairly infrequently because I don't get that much that much more out of it. And it is bringing you into a pretty dark universe, although some classical music brings you into a dark universe as well. So that's not unique. But look, it's a different style of music. It's rock. It's progressive rock or whatever they call it. It doesn't have. You can sense that it just doesn't have the complexity again of emotion that brought out that a classical piece has, even though it can be very beautiful.
I don't think that. What I think is that rock music is its own genre, and it should be, and it shouldn't really shy away from it. There are enormous differences in quality in different kinds of rock music and different rock composers, and that's fine, and that should be one that comes up quite frequently in discussing, say, high quality rock is Rush, which I've listened to. I don't particularly enjoy or identify, but you can hear a lot more complexity. They're doing a lot more with the music. They were very talented musicians. There's perfectly fine to, if you enjoy it, then you should absolutely enjoy it. I don't think it needs to be called classical. I think it's sort of a problem of trying to identify anything that is good, therefore must be classical. No, I think you just acknowledge what's good in its own genre, and if you enjoy it, there's no need to try and make every good piece of music somehow become identified as classical.
Right. So would you say...
But I'll just say this, like almost everything in every art, the 19th century, rules. Now, in other arts, you could argue that the Renaissance and there were other periods in music, there's a clear development, and it seems to peak in the 19th century, early 20th century. There's a peak, and that needs to be recognized. And I think if you really immerse yourself in it, you give it an opportunity. I think even though we can't explain it, we can experience it.
There is a great deal of music that I think is from the 20th century that is good. I did another, I think it was the Pittsburgh conference called 20th Century Romanticism, which was to identify all the best music that are, not all, I didn't have nearly enough time, but to identify some strands of good music that did happen in the 20th and even up to our own time in the 21st century. So, but I would rarely suggest that anybody start there if they're not terribly experienced in listening.
Right.
I think you need to have the context of past music to appreciate what I think is the best, most of the best of 20th and 21st century music.
Okay, I have some follow-ups on that, but let's go to Bob first. Bob, unmute yourself.
Yeah, just as a concrete, what do you think of Peter and the Wolf? Prokofiev.
I think it's a wonderful piece of music on several levels. I think it's a wonderful piece for children. It's wonderful to listen to just as a piece of music. It's I have nothing but good things to say about it.
Yeah, I find it entertaining. I mean, again, it's not my first preference when I really want to immerse myself, but I find it entertaining.
It was the piece that my uncle bought for my mother when I was 10 years old and had her play it for me.
Oh, good. Good.
Yeah, I have nothing but good things. I mean, Prokofiev is, I think somewhere there was probably it comes from Peter and the Wolf that he's the most performed composer of the 20th century.
Oh.
So I have some quite technical questions coming to me as DM. Someone ask Thomas who he thinks should take over as conductor of the London Symphony Orchestra. Okay, that's probably too
Thomas should. I think that's easy.
Right. Okay. Right. Here's another question that I got actually from a group. How do I learn to understand / interpret music in the way that Ayn Rand did? I enjoy listening to classical music, but whenever I read her judgment on music, I seem to miss 90% from what I listen myself. And actually, I also sympathize with that. I told you that when I listened to what Rand had in her mind as Richard Halley, I thought, what, this? I was expecting something way more triumphant. So is there any particular way to listen to music, quote, philosophically or from the prism of Rand? Or
Yeah, I think that's actually a mistake. I think there's a kind of a mistaken premise there. I would not try and approach it that way. I don't think you should try and approach, how do I listen to music so that I hear what Rand heard? That's almost an impossible task. I think that's going to get in your way of really trying to hear what you want to hear and hear what you can get out of the music. I don't think that's a very fruitful way to approach listening, actually, myself.
I agree with that, but I would say, I mean, it's Ayn Rand, so I'm always curious what she liked. I want to listen to what she liked. I want to see, I want to try to understand at least what she saw in it. You know, I don't think there's anything she liked that have not responded positively to. It's not always my favorite. And, you know, as I said, I love Beethoven, and she clearly didn't. And that to me is interesting to contemplate. Why do I like Beethoven? Why did she not? And what is going on there? So I find, because it's Ayn Rand, I find it interesting to think about those things. But I would. So, you know, when I first read the books, and granted, when I first started listening to classical music, put it this way, and granted, I was an unbelievable rationalist. I ran to figure out, okay, what classical pieces that Ayn Rand mentioned in all the novels, and I immediately went to listen to those. And I have to say, I wasn't disappointed, because to me, Haley and Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, or Tchaikovsky's First Piano Concerto, as she says, the opening bars of that First Piano Concerto by Tchaikovsky, I mean, I don't know what more sweeping or more, you know, powerful you can get. So I mean, give it a shot, not because you want to experience it like she did. You won't. You don't have her sense of life. You cannot have her sense of life. But it's interesting to see if she saw something in it, there's something in it, right? So it's worth experiencing and trying out, not in order to imitate her, not in order to experience what she did, but just to see how you respond to it.
Right, yeah. I was mostly referring to the Mussorgsky part, which is the Concert of Deliverance, that it sounded a bit slower than the bombastic thing that you'd expect from the book. But again, yeah, what do I know from that? Okay, by the way, at some point I tried to create a YouTube list with all the music that Ayn Rand liked. And actually I'm in contact with Mike Berliner to check what of these things are valid recollections and which are not. And if this project materializes, I might post it on our page, and it could be interesting. Okay, here's another question. So someone mentioned Prokofiev, so that's a good lead into the next question. So can someone appreciate music out of the context that this music was written for? Let me give an example. So some years ago, I found some music very nice, epic music, heroic music, pumping up music, like for working out, whatever. And then I realized, when I start researching a bit more, that this music is actually created by a quasi-fascist thing, and the video clip shows like Roman salutes and weird things like that. Or another example, Prokofiev was mentioned. So, for example, Shostakovich, I think his most famous piece was initially, its first appearance was in a film which is the highlight, the peak of Stalinist Soviet realism cinema. So is there any level beyond which you could say, no, this music is, it's not, you shouldn't sanction it? Or is it that if it speaks to you, even if it's the music through which the Red Army is marching to, I don't know what, or if it's the music that supposedly, I don't know, celebrates the white race or whatever, can it tell something completely different to you for the reason that the music was initially written?
Well, in a broad sense, the answer is absolutely yes. You can enjoy, for instance, music that is written for a ballet in a concert setting. You can listen to music from film and take that out of the context for what it was intended, and then listen to it just in those terms. You can listen to what, the term among musicians, bleeding chunks out of Wagner operas and listen to them as concert music and not be sitting in an opera house and listening to them. Now, the separate question that's being asked is about the music that has bad ideological connections, like Stalinism or Nazism, or even you could say religious music, religion. So, the answer still can be, I think, yes, that music, if you can enjoy the music and separate it from any of the ideological issues that are there, you can definitely do that. I mean, some people find that very challenging and difficult. I mean, Yaron would probably know in Israel, I think it still isn't possible, or either you can't or it's very frowned upon to do Wagner, not because he was a Nazi, but because the associations with Nazism, because he was an anti-Semite. So that some people find that very challenging. I and quite a number of Jewish musicians, however, revere Wagner. So I can understand why sometimes people would find it challenging if they were listening to a piece that had direct ideological connections to something they find odious. I think it's a very personal question how you respond to that.
Yeah, I think again, it's easier for me to talk about this in like sculpture, right? Because you can see it and you can talk about. So clearly, if you look at Soviet and Nazi sculpture, there is an initial temptation to say, oh, it's heroic, it's individualistic. Well, maybe not individualistic, but it's man-focused, it's so on. But then if you look a little bit closer, you discover that it's horrible, right? It's materialistic, there's no spirit, there's no soul, there's no real movement, it's the clumps of matter, and it's clearly trying to convey some kind of collectivistic message. Now, I don't know if there's an equivalent to that in music, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if there was something like that where once you really experience the music, you say, now there's something really nasty going on here that I don't like. But I don't know if that's the case. Now, certainly musicians... Yeah, go ahead.
One of the classic people in this instance was Shostakovich, who lived under Stalin, and we have Shostakovich's memoirs, if we're to believe them, and most people now tend to give them a fair amount of credence, that Shostakovich often would write pieces that he needed to write in order to satisfy the officials, and then in his other pieces tried to do what he wanted to do, often with a very dark sense of life because he was Shostakovich. But I mean, he would write some, ode to the great harvest of 1950 under the leadership of wonderful Stalin. He would write this ode that was required for a party meeting, and then write, after Stalin's death, release his symphony that is just, that has overtones of absolutely blasting Stalin. So you have to, again, it's important to understand that not every piece in a composer, every single piece kind of has to be evaluated differently.
Actually, Shostakovich was quite in trouble quite often, whereas Prokofiev, because I think he was also more famous abroad, he was way more daring.
Shostakovich and Prokofiev were in trouble with the officials, actually.
Sorry?
Both Shostakovich and Prokofiev were frequently in trouble with the officials.
Yeah, but Prokofiev was felt a bit safer because also he had like an appeal abroad.
But this is the challenge. The challenge is to take the music and turn it into a conceptual message, which is much harder to do in music, and maybe impossible, I don't know, than it is with other art forms where you can say, no, Hugo, there's a socialist theme here, as Ayn Rand says about Les Miserables, and there's a conceptual theme, and we ignore that because of everything else that Hugo manages to do but at some point the theme is so overwhelming and the style so poor, like in Nazi and Soviet sculpture, that there's no value there. There's nothing you can get out of it. In music, you're responding to something very different. Again, it's a direct appeal to your sense of life, to an emotional state, and it's in that sense, it's hard to, pull out an ideology from it. But I have no doubt that there's some crap, really, really bad music that is motivated by really, really bad ideology, and might be appealing on first glance, but very unappealing once you listen to it more carefully.
Well, there's a lot of really bad Soviet music written by mediocre composers.
Yes, but then the question is it because it's Soviet or is it because they're mediocre? Or is it the combination? Maybe it's both.
Probably it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
So, actually, Alan asks, don't you think there is something objective in connection of the music and the ideology? And this links also very well. There's another very good point. Someone mentions the Internationale. The International. So I don't remember exactly how Ran put it in With the Living. He said it's as if history was marching, like so. For her, so she recognized, let's say, how good the music is to portray that message. So reading With the Living, I would get that Ran actually appreciated the International, but also she understood how it.
What kind of world it was?
This collectivism.
Yeah,
Sorry?
what kind of world it was conveying, and what kind of, and if people responded to it, what they wanted is to be marching in large groups across along the streets. It conveyed that sense, but the mechanism by which it conveys it, that's what I don't think we really have the language to fully understand how it does that. But there's no question, you can understand when you listen to religious music, you can understand why it's religious and why the church uses it and why the Catholic Church spends so much energy on getting a lot of music produced, because it does put you in a particular state of mind that I think is, it creates a kind of a longing for a particular type of experience that the church would then capitalize on. So it used it in that sense. If you bring a different context to it, I think you can still enjoy it. You can bring your context, and it places you in a different world, not in a religious experience. But Ayn Rand talked about the fact that you could use religious terminology to reflect your values. It wasn't, and I think some of their music is like that.
I think that applies to both the categories that say Soviet and even Nazi influence music, but also, definitely religious music. People have referred to Bach with the B minor Mass, the St. Matthew Passion. They've referred to Bach in some cases as the fifth evangelist in the power that he had. And there's some atheist, I cannot remember the name, that wrote, "Bach makes me want to believe." And that's a powerful statement, how powerful the music is and how incredible the music is as music. And so, again, you have to be able, usually it's helpful to be able to separate some of these things, to evaluate them in music as music, and then does it match with anything in your sense of life? Do you enjoy hearing it? But then also, how do you present it? Do you present it in a concert setting? I've usually made it a practice for years not to help religious services. I don't like to participate, even as a paid musician, in religious services, except some exceptions are weddings and funerals, which I consider legitimate things to happen. They just shouldn't happen in church. But I don't like to help do a Sunday service for pay. I don't generally like to do that.
Right.
Because I feel like that's helping the church with its mission. But I'll put on the Bach. I would love to put on a Bach cantata or a Bach B minor Mass in a concert.
So many comments on the chat on religious music. So we're going to go for 10, 15 minutes more. So if someone has a question, probably now is the time. So let me bring one
I will
final.
Be right back.
Sorry?
He'll be right back, you said.
Yeah, right. Okay, so let me bring one final theme to the discussion, which is jazz. So again, mostly for people who are not very initiated, maybe, jazz sounds something like what again we'd call maybe classical music. So it has this harmony, it has this. So actually, let me start with a different question. Can we categorize music styles as objectively, this is the best, this is the second best, this is the third best? Does such a categorization make sense somehow on an objective standard? And what is that standard?
My guess is that you could, but you'd have to be an expert in aesthetics of music, and you'd have to understand. And it doesn't mean you have to respond to the great music. You might hate it, but you should be able to identify its greatness. I mean, that's true of any work of art. You know, you should be, or any field in aesthetics, you should be able to say, here's great art. I don't like it, but I recognize its greatness. And I think in terms of different styles, yes, I think it's probably true that you could rank them in terms of their, again, their ability to really evoke certain emotions and the depth of those emotions and the ability to listen to them more than once and experience different things. So I think the answer is probably yes, but you'd have to be we're not there yet. I don't think we have the language, the tools, the knowledge. I mean, Ayn Rand gave us a path, right? In Art Cognition, she starts giving us a direction of where you would go to try to have an objective theory of music and how you would therefore rank the music from an aesthetic quality ability. All we can do now is talk about what it makes. I mean, you can do more, but in terms of I think a lot of it is how do you respond to it? How do people respond to it?
So Linda says the question needs to be for whom and for what. But that's why I said, and hopefully it doesn't.
But no, I don't think Linda's right. That is, aesthetic value is not for whom and for what. There are objective standard of what great painting is. And you might get nothing out of a great painting, but there's still an objective standard of what it is, what greatness is. And then for whom and for what is that painting of value to you? So then it is, is it a value to you? And when is it a value to you? In what context? But the aesthetic evaluation of the painting is a science. It's like science.
Yeah, it's very hard to do in music, like you were just saying a few minutes ago. We don't have the conceptual framework. We don't have anywhere near the science, the kind of brain science we would need. There's so many things we would need to have that kind of knowledge in music. And I mean, one thing that's interesting to note is a term I've used for a long time for most pop music is disposable music. It's fine. It functions for a few minutes and you get rid of it. After, a pop song lasts its life after a few days or weeks or maybe a few months, its value is largely in nostalgia for the people who were, say, teenagers when that song was popular. And other than that, it doesn't last or have any real standing of the test of time. Now, that's not an ultimate proof of value, but it's an awfully strong indicator.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's interesting with popular music that every generation thinks that the music it listened to when they were teenagers is the best. Right?
Of course.
So 70s music, of course 70s music is the best. And it's because the pop music is very associative. It relates to specific experiences that you have. It brings back particular memories. And it's not music that goes beyond that direct connection between what you were doing when you first heard the song or who you were holding hands with or your first kiss or whatever. It's very associative in that sense. And I think that better music, if I can say, is music that is not related to a specific experience, that is much more universal in the values that it represents and in the emotions that it evokes in you. I mean, that's the best, and that's the difference.
That's the best we got.
Yeah, that's the best we got.
Okay, so...
And in that sense, my evaluation of Pink Floyd relates a lot to being a depressed 17-year-old, right? And not getting dates, right? So Pink Floyd appealed to the darkness in my teenage years, battling the world. I love... And I literally remember scenes out of my teen years of like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan, right? So there's something there that appealed to me, having read Atlas Shrugged and feeling like I was battling the world, nobody understood me, and being kicked around, and it was that, it appealed to that. And when I hear it today, it brings that back. That little slice of world, it brings that back. But Beethoven, Brahms, Rachmaninoff, opera, they're not associated with any particular experience I have. They're much broader. It's a world that brings forward rather than a particular experience and a particular association.
It's a little funny, though, for someone who's trained in classical music, raised as a classical musician, there are specific teenage life events that are associated with some of these classical pieces. I'm not going to get into too graphic a detail, but you can remember some of these pieces, and they're actually great classical pieces that have broader value and broader life, but they are associated with those events in teenage years.
Yep.
So before we get to the last question, there's disagreement whether there's objective value for music, but what is definitely an objective value is the value we get from the work of the Ayn Rand Institute. Again, without their sanction, the moral, but also the material, we wouldn't bring these events. So I'm going to put in the chat the membership program, how you can help spread these good ideas, bring a bit quicker that world that we all want to see and all these good ideas. So I would encourage you to become members. The membership starts from relatively for a low amount of money, and we're getting a lot of value out of it. So last question. By the way, if you've asked a question in the chat and among the heavy traffic, I've missed it, feel free to post it again. So someone asks, do you guys have trouble enjoying an orchestral piece when played using synthesizers that are attempting to sound like real pianos, violins, etc.? I find I can't enjoy it. And let me add one more layer here. If you go to YouTube and put piano played by a robot or something, it's exactly the same notes, but it sounds completely different from a human being playing it. But anyway, that's two different levels. So, Thomas.
Well, music played by synthesizers can be very valid. For instance, there was a famous album already back in the 70s called Switched on Bach, in which a Moog synthesizer did a lot of Bach. I think it's a wonderful, Bach's music is very well suited. I don't know that, say, Brahms would be so well suited. Because Bach's music has a certain kind of counterpoint, it was very well suited to Moog synthesizer. It sounded quite good. I really enjoyed that album. I still do. I don't think I'd want to hear Brahms. And it's not because I like Brahms better than Bach. That's not the reason. I like both of them almost equally. But Brahms does not seem like it would be well suited to the Moog system. Now, modern, there's such a level of computers and technology now that you can make these instruments sound fairly close to real things. There still doesn't. I've heard what composers now will do is they will send you a MIDI file that they've put their new composition with all the different instruments computerized so that you can at least have some idea what it's supposed to sound like. It still sounds very, very strange. It doesn't sound like a real orchestra. So I'm not particularly interested in hearing a big symphonic work usually played in an artificial way like that. And it also will lack the personality of a real human being playing, or human beings playing, conducting, performing, singing, whatever. So I'm not particularly interested in hearing these pieces played by robots.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever heard something like that where I've enjoyed it. But yeah, and I think my tastes are narrower than Thomas's. He's got a much wider repertoire of things that he loves, whereas mine is, I think, narrower.
Okay. By the way, the last 2 minutes will be you telling us probably your top 3 or 5 music pieces. So start thinking about it. We're gonna have one more question, although I said we wouldn't have. It's like the rock groups that come back to the stage. In analyzing music, don't you need to distinguish between analyzing music without any lyrical or visual component from music with lyrics or images, for example, movies, in which the creator is giving you more of an understanding of his or her conceptual view of the world? And our friend gives us an example, Marriage and Sondheim's Company.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a difference between listening to symphonic work and listening to opera, or there is a difference. The one is stimulating just one sense, and the other is an integration of the emotional response you get from the music, plus what you're getting from the more conceptually, the story, the acting, the visuals, the camera angles, and all of that. And there's definitely a difference. And I think you listen to them differently. I think you can enjoy good music that is done for the opera or the stage, operetta, you can enjoy without looking at it. But there's a whole new dimension that once you get the visuals is added on top of that. So you can enjoy it even more thoroughly with more dimensions associated with it. So, yeah, I don't think it's the same. They're different, but they have
like
certain
the
themes.
Schubert Lieder, or anybody who writes songs in classical song, you have to be able to. There's the poetry and there's the music together. You can appreciate the music just as music, but then if you understand, either you know the language or you read the translation, it adds or detracts depending on what the poetry is. It will certainly change the experience.
One of the great benefits of opera being sung not in English is that you don't understand what they're saying, because often then you can imagine, what you'd like them to be saying, and not that the gypsy just threw a baby into the fire and all of that, but something beautiful and romantic and spectacular, because the music is so amazing. And
Il Trovatore lately.
What's that? I love Il Trovatore. I love the music, but the story is pretty bad. And there's a value in listening to opera without watching it, because the stories can be so silly that they can be distracting. And listening to the music and then maybe watching it so that now you can focus on is an advantage. But yes, one of the advantages of operettas, which Ayn Rand really loved, is that the stories are wonderful, and the music is wonderful. And you don't have to step back from anything. You can kind of enjoy the experience as a whole. You don't walk away saying, that was just, the stories are simple typically, but they're charming. And in opera, you can't say that in opera. The stories are never charming. The tragic and often malevolent.
They vary quite. The stories of opera, there's opera buffa, funny, yes. And then there's opera serious. There's serious, dramatic. When it all works together, it's extraordinary. Like if you have Otello of Verdi, which is a great story, which is pretty much translated word for word from the English into Italian, and you've got Verdi, mature, late Verdi's music. That is one of the extraordinary opera experiences, because the story, the lyrics, and the music all work together at a highest level.
Right, so we have 6 more minutes, so probably there's time also for David's question before we ask our guests for their favorite piece of music. So David asks, I'm interested in the relations between the performer quality and his philosophy or other sense of life. So I assume this means if there's the better your sense of life, the better your performance. Would something like that apply?
I'm not really convinced. There's so many great performers and even composers who had horrible sense of lives. I don't know that really holds.
What has to impact the performance, right? So you might not say it's better, but it has to be different. Your interpretation is going to be conditioned on your sense of life, no?
Perhaps, yeah. People can sort of put on masks. You can treat a piece of music, if you're a performer, for instance, you can sort of become like an actor. You don't have to believe it yourself, but you have to believe it for the performance.
Right, makes sense. Right. Okay. So before we say goodbye, Thomas and Yaron, first, what is your favorite, let's say 2 or 3 pieces of music? But also, what do you consider objectively the best piece of music ever written? And please don't tell me I haven't got answers. If you had to give an answer, what would be the answer?
Well, I have answers, but the question, what is my favorite piece of music? What is my favorite piece of music to listen to? What is my favorite pieces of music to conduct? What are my favorite pieces of music to play?
To listen to.
What?
Listen to.
Some of the Mahler symphonies and Strauss tone poems are among my very favorites to listen to. And conduct, though.
Yaron?
Well, first, I don't think we can have an answer to the objectively, but for the reasons I don't think we have the tools. You'd have to know a lot more about the brain its connection to the ear, and then the connection between that and to the way we think and how emotions are evoked. And we're far from, I think, having an objective theory of music, which you would need in order to say this is the objectively best piece of music. I just don't think that's doable today. I know that's not doable today. My favorite, I mean, it's hard to 2 or 3. I mean, yeah, I mean, I love the piano concertos, the Rachmaninoff and the Tchaikovsky. I love those pieces. I love Beethoven's Seventh. Of all the Beethoven symphonies, I think that's my favorite. I think it's the most positive, energy-wise, of all of them. But that is a really hard question because it depends on my mood. It depends on how I'm listening. It depends on whether I've heard it recently or not. And one of the things, and maybe this is a good way to end, one of the things I encourage people to do is listen. There's a lot. The 19th century, there were a lot of composers. A lot of music was written. The early 20th century, the part where I think is easily listenable and where there's a lot of greatness. And almost you can't go wrong in the 19th century with music. I mean, I'm sure they're bad by Thomas's standards, but by most music written and that is recorded today from the 19th century is good or enjoyable. And just listen to a bunch of stuff and figure out what you like. And I find that I discover new pieces all the time from the 19th century from relatively unknown composers that are really enjoyable. So,
right,
there's a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff.
Right. Thank you. So a huge thank you to our speaker. So, by the way, Thomas, for people who want to follow more your work, so we should direct them on your website.
What work? The pandemic.
Something about what you're doing.
What work? There's no work right now.
Right. Okay. So until there is again work and life, I'm giving the link on the chat where you can find more about Thomas. So a huge thank you, Thomas. A huge thank you, Yaron.
Thank you very much for having me.
You all know where to find Yaron. He's hosting the Yaron Brook show. So, and you probably already follow it. So also a big thanks to our audience. Again, I really appreciate the fact that we are 11 months into Zoom events and people still have the energy. People don't give up. People don't say, oh, I don't want to do anything else. Now it's, it's enough. The life is over. So in a way, I see this as a resistance of life until we come out victorious and we go back to the world out there. Anyway, big thank you to the speakers, to the audience. Thanks to the Ayn Rand Institute for helping us with this event. Thanks to Anne also for helping. Thanks to Tal. Thanks to everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.